I'm making my own way, but I stumble and I falter every day. But I love my baby now. But I love my baby, I'm still learning how. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Stay with me.
Welcome to today's show of Pathways to Parenting Success. On today's show, we're going to talk about ways to prepare your student for a successful college experience. Joining me today are Dr. Sunda Friedemann Tabakhorst. Dr. Tabakhorst's experience is in providing therapeutic services to older adolescents and adults in a welcoming, non-judgmental setting. She's also worked in a college counseling center as well as taught college courses. We also are joined by Brooks Witter. Brooks' experience is focused on older adolescents and young adults and providing them with the tools and the strategies that they need to make a successful transition. In addition, we're joined by Chris Pacheco, who is the director of the pre-college outreach at the University of Colorado in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement. And Chris's focus is on providing tools and services to students, particularly first-generation low-income students, as they transition into college. So thank you all for being here today. One of the things that I would like to get started with is talking a little bit about that transition to college. It's a huge transition, particularly for students and parents. I know that one of the things as parents we do is we really try to make sure that we work with our students so that they can make that transition. And as a parent of a first-year college student, I know it's really important to have given them the tools and the support they need to make that transition successfully. So I was wondering if maybe, Sunda, you might want to tell us a little bit about what are some of the recommendations you have for parents that they can do in the spring to help support their students to make that transition to the fall.
Yes, I'd love to talk about that. And the first thing I'd say is I would distinguish between two different types of success in college. One is academic success, and one is kind of social emotional success. And I think both are really critical elements for a good start to college. And so on the academic front, I think it's really important for parents to be turning ownership of the academic experience over to their student by this time in the year, so that they are owning things like time management and any ramifications or repercussions for not turning things in on time, and also checking in with them on how confident they feel in their skill levels. Do you know how to write a paper? Do you know how to manage time? Those kinds of things for academic success. On the social emotional front, I think there's some really critical pieces that parents can be helping students get in place the spring before their first year of college, in terms of helping them to be thoughtful and intentional about things like what kind of people do they want to hang out with, what kinds of experiences do they want to be having during their first year of college, rather than just kind of turning them loose to show up and figure out what they want to do when it comes. And normalizing some important pieces of things. You know, I think some high school students get the impression that, for example, binge drinking might be a big part of the college social experience. And statistically, in reality, that's not true for most students, and so we can kind of help take some of that pressure off of them. A lot of students, kind of default into a friend group of people that they live close to in the dorms or people who are in their classes, which is not a bad thing, but also helping them to be intentional and thoughtful about who do I want to have as a friend group for my college career. And other skills like talking to teachers and being proactive on their own behalf are also important skills that they can learn during high school.
Great. Brooks, I'm curious if maybe you can share some tools that you might recommend for parents on ways to approach those conversations with their student as they get ready to make that transition from high school to college.
Yeah, I think I agree with Sunda that the transition is can be very abrupt if we're not preparing our kids for that transition for the year, 2 years, 3 years of high school approaching college. And so I think it's really important for parents to have in mind that, the goal of parenting an adolescent is to prepare them for life on their own. So we move from really, as parents, kind of providing for our kids to providing an environment where our kids learn to provide for themselves. So we want to, as parents, we want to create situations where our kids are developing the problem-solving skills, the self-assessment skills, the stress management and emotional distress skills that they will need when they leave the nest and face the challenges of more independent living. So if you're a parent of a junior or senior in high school and you're still dictating the terms of when they get their work done, who they spend time with, how they spend their time, and you're still as involved as you were when they were 14, I would say you've really got to check yourself and find ways to pull back and create situations where your kid is taking on more of the responsibility for self-management. And that's going to take a lot of distress tolerance on a parent's part as well, because it's anxiety-provoking to see our kids struggle when we know that we can end their struggle by just doing this for them or doing this with them or being right there next to them as they do something. But we're do them a disservice if that's our approach. We really need to be able to watch them struggle, help them relate to struggling, so that they can achieve the confidence that comes with successfully completing a difficult task and developing a sense of, oh, I can do these difficult things. I know how to resource myself and who to contact when I get in trouble.
Sunda, would you like to follow up on that?
Yes, thank you. So just one quick follow-up, which is this. In my experience, there's a common misconception among young adults and older adolescents, which is that part of being an adult is knowing how to do everything. And I think it's very important to correct that misconception in our, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, to knowing when and how and from whom to ask for help is a critical part of being an adult, right? So you don't have to know how to do everything, but you need to know when to ask for help, and colleges are full of resources for helping students, and so helping them understand it's important to ask for help, and finding who to ask is an important adulting skill.
I agree. I think that's a really critical skill. It's something that carries you forward throughout your life, is knowing when to ask for help and how to ask for help. Sometimes I think the tricky part is figuring out where to go and how you understand what those resources are. Because Chris, could you talk a little bit about how parents, because a parent relationship with their first-year student is different than it would be as their freshman year. And so talk a little bit about maybe ways that parents can change their relationship with their student, ways they might want to change their communication patterns or how they communicate with their student that supports their student in making that transition, because I know you've worked with a lot of different students and families.
Well, I think that the first piece of advice I would give is for parents not to get frustrated when students don't do exactly what they're anticipating doing or what they're expected to do. I don't know that I would recommend that they change how they communicate with their son or daughter. More so, I would encourage them to listen more and not necessarily interject, because my experience tells me that a lot of times students, particularly if they've given it some thought about the transition that they're going to be going through, are looking for a sounding board. They're not looking for an answer or for advice. Many times they've already worked through the thought process of how they're going to go about solving a problem, but they need somebody to listen to them and either offer an alternative way or to verify that it's a good thought process. And so I always tell parents, resist the temptation to save, listen, and then make recommendations on who they might ask for advice on the campus. And as my colleague said, there's lots of experience to draw from on the campus if you know where to look. And I guess that's the other piece that I would recommend to parents is search out these resources alongside your child. Too many times we anticipate that once they become college students, they're on their own. And that's not necessarily the case. In fact, I would argue that that first semester in particular, the interaction between the child and the parent is even more critical than normal, because they're taking that first step forward, but not necessarily ready to leave the nest, so to speak, even though they'll tell you that they are.
You know, one of the things I think that's a difference between high school and college is in high school, parents have access to Infinite Campus. They can look at their students' assignments, they can look at their students' attendance, they can see what tests are coming up, all of that academic information. And I think it's really important for parents to understand that as their student transitions to college, they don't have access to that information anymore. And Chris, I understand that you've gotten calls sometimes from parents about, well, I need to look at my students' grades, or how do I get in touch with this professor about their assignment? What would you recommend in those circumstances?
I would recommend don't do it. We get constant calls from parents, and I find it interesting that first-generation parents tend not to do that because they don't have the experience. Parents who are college educated are typically the people who call me the most. Now, it is possible for them to gain access to the students' academic records, but I would, again, encourage them not to do that. I think it all gets back to what is the relationship you have with your son or daughter. If you've got a good relationship with your son or daughter, they will share this information with you. It may take some prompting, but they will share it with you. I always tell parents, if you feel the need to do this without your parents, your son or daughter's consent, or without letting them know, then you're overly engaged, and you're not ready to let go. And in some respects, you could do more harm than good, because if you don't understand the university system and you try to interject yourself into that system without that knowledge, you could actually be doing your son or daughter damage as far as their personal transition to the university is concerned, but also damaging their relationship with the professor.
You know, one of the things, as you talk about the relationship you have with your child, and whether you have a close relationship or not, one of the things that I hear from students on campus is that the relationship with their parent shifts somewhat, because they've spent some time on campus. They may be living on campus in residence halls. They choose their classes. They choose when to eat, choose when to go to sleep. They choose their friends, what they do on the weekends. And so they're starting to make a lot of decisions on their own. And then sometimes when they go back for that first long holiday break, there's a little bit of a tension between what the relationship with their parents were in the home when they left to what it looks like now. Brooks, what advice would you give for parents in that type of a situation?
Well, I'm going to echo Chris here, and I'm going to say listen. Listen more. The transition from parent-child to adult relationship that should be happening developmentally as our kids leave the nest and become more sort of autonomous, independent, self-managing, is ultimately, as parents, I would hope that our goal would be to foster a relationship where we are trusted allies for our kids' development. Now, we are wise elders, but as parents, we have to, in order to be that, in order to gain the trust and foster the trust and confidence in our kids that they so long for, we need to be able to trust them to figure out their own issues, and we need to be able to trust them to navigate school and to not interfere with their grades or calling their professors or emailing them. So for us to pull back as parents and in that first holiday break, just listen and observe and get curious about who your kid is becoming as an adult. Ask questions to assess their levels of engagement, and also pay attention to any of the warning signs that might indicate that they're really struggling in that transition. But do so, in a way that's curious. Because our kids, developmentally, as they step from adolescence into adulthood, there's a natural aversion to receiving guidance from the parent as they received it as a kid, because they want to test their chops. They want to get out there and hunt for themselves and forage for themselves, so to speak. As mammals, our job is done when they can do that. And so developmentally, there's a prickliness and a pushing away if we become too much of a parent to adult of a kid, so to speak.
Sunda, would you like to follow up on that?
Yeah, I want to kind of tag on to what both Mike and Brooks are saying, which is to say that one of the fundamental skills for social emotional success in the college environment is what we call self-efficacy, which is the fundamental belief that I can change my environment, that I can set a goal and using my own internal resources achieve that goal. And that's it's a huge component of whether or not the first-year college student is going to succeed. And when parents do things like intervene, go over the child's head without their consent or knowledge, or try to kind of retake over their lives when they're home for a break, like Brooks is talking about, what they're doing is kind of impairing that sense of self-efficacy, and that's kind of one of the primary active harms that Mike referenced that parents can do to kids who are trying to fledge and need to believe that they have the capacity and ability to do it by themselves.
I know one of the things that, I know the title of our show is Preparing for a Successful College Experience, and sometimes I think when we hear that, we think about the academic piece, but the social emotional piece is absolutely critical, I think, for students to be successful when they make that transition and when they move on into college. Because when you look at statistics around the country, and you also see some of this in high school as well, that one of the biggest factors impacting students today is stress and the amount of stress that they feel, which then can lead to other things like getting sick, feeling anxious, and other consequences that relate to their health. And once you start impacting your health, that also has an impact on your academics. I'm wondering if you could share some suggestions of ways that students can maybe handle their stress, and maybe ways that parents can support them in handling the stress that they're experiencing. Sunda, would you like to start?
Sure. I think that one really important concept in stress management is the proactive versus the reactive approach, which is essentially to say that I think one of the things that we can do throughout elementary school, middle school, and high school for our kids is help them learn to anticipate periods of high stress and to be reflective and active in understanding how they as an individual can manage that proactively, right? So if we were chatting before the show and talking about finals time is approaching and for college students, and their stress levels are very high right now. And so if they know, okay, I'm going to have finals week coming up, here are some things that I can do to take active steps towards self-care. I can make sure I'm getting enough sleep. I can make sure I'm eating regularly. I can do these kinds of steps. That's a proactive approach to stress management, which is going to have better outcomes than the reactive approach to stress management, which happens to a lot of first-year college students who all of a sudden realize that I haven't slept in 2 days. I don't know when the last time I've eaten was. I have a final exam tomorrow that I haven't studied for, and I'm going to break down. And then they have to kind of try to react to that and get through that crisis. So I think that's a huge component, is helping our kids learn to anticipate, prepare for, and cope with periods of stress is a critical life skill.
Great. Brooks, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd like to add to that is helping our kids while they're still in your care, in high school, in your house, helping them to take perspective on themselves so that they can discover the early warnings indicators of when they are stressed out. Because when they're in college, they can be so distracted and so immersed in fun and engaging activities that they can often miss cues that they are experiencing a lot of stress. So as a parent, you have the exquisite sensitivity to your kids' stress level in that you can see their patterns of behavior and where they go to when they're stressed. Do they check out on video games? Do they lose sleep? Do they overeat or undereat? Do they immerse themselves in social activities at the expense of school? So helping them to develop an awareness, a self-awareness, and so that they can better anticipate those periods of stress just from reading their own cues, so that they can take protective measures, and equipping them with kind of a go-to list of protective measures that they do take and that can take that have been helpful.
Great. Thank you. Chris, one of the things that both Sunda and Brooke mentioned is ways to cope with stress and find those places where you can get support for stress. How would you recommend that parents navigate with their student, finding ways to plug into resources on campus or places that they can have their student connect to maybe that's stress relieving or supports them in navigating their stress or gives them tips on how to handle finals? Or what steps would you recommend for parents and students to take in understanding what's available to them?
Well, I think that we have to remember that this should actually be an ongoing conversation. And so we talked a little bit earlier about how to handle, the first holiday that the students come home. But I would encourage parents to have an ongoing conversation from the very start of the semester. As Brooke said, we all have a good sense of how our students, sons and daughters, handle stress. And so having that ongoing conversation and not being intrusive, but not feeling afraid to contact them on occasion. Case in point, my wife, when our son went to college, she was always asking me about how he was doing because he went to CU Boulder. And I reminded her that he had a cell phone and that she should call him. And her response was, well, I don't want to bother him. And so I think we need to get away from that concept. You're not really bothering them. It's okay to check on them on occasion. Because that ongoing conversation reassures them that mom and dad still have their best interest at mind, but they're not going to be intrusive. They want them to be a young adult. And as the student transitions to campus, I think it's important that the parent come alongside with them. You can only learn so much from a website. And so it's important to have, especially for parents, to have that face-to-face conversation with someone who is from the admissions office or from the financial aid office, because they can then refer you to other resources on campus. But in addition to having that referral, having the introduction. And so it's most helpful for me when someone from the admissions office comes up and says, this is so-and-so, this is his or her son or daughter, and they are interested in doing this. Because then I can make that personal connection and help refer them to other resources on campus. And I think that at that point in time, it's also important to let the students know you're not here alone. You don't have to do this alone. There's lots of resources for you to draw from. You do have to be willing to ask for them, but they are available to them. And so, again, those personal introductions all along the way will make a huge difference for both the student and the parent in finding comfort level with the campus, and also finding the resources that they'll need as those stressful points come along.
Great, thank you. I know we're getting close to time, and so I wanted to give each of you the opportunity to share maybe one or two things that you would like parents to take away from our conversation today. And I will start with Sunda.
Thank you. Just reflecting on what Chris was just saying, sitting in my shoes as a former college teacher, I think for students to do that introducing themselves piece too. And one of my experiences as a college teacher was that students kind of didn't realize that we were human beings and were kind of afraid to talk to us and approach us as a human being. And they had important questions, or they had important things that they needed to work out with us. And so helping your student understand the importance of just being willing to go up to your professor and say, hello, my name is, John Jones, and I sit in the third row. So that when you have a question or a concern, you can go to your teacher. They'll know your face. They'll recognize you. I think that's a huge piece of first-year college. The other thing is, I would again echo what Chris has said about resources on college campuses, and I think sometimes students feel so overwhelmed when they get to this really big campus and they have to schedule classes and they have to do all these things that they don't realize the number and depth of resources that are often available on college campuses. And so helping the student navigate that as the parent and helping them do the introductory process to this is where the tutors are, and this is where the writing center is, and this is where the counseling center is, and this is where the research librarians sit, and all of those resources that will be helpful to them to help them gain a comfort level so when they run into the problem, they go back to a pre-existing knowledge set. Oh, I know who to go to for help with this problem is a huge step up for success.
Great, thank you. Brooks.
Just protect the relationship. And one thing that I see that really nurtures relationship is an open and curious stance towards your emerging adult. And one thing that really gets in the way of the relationship, that really can harm the relationship, is if we fixate too much on what's not happening and what's going wrong, rather than simply stepping back and being curious and just admiring a self that is emerging as an adult, and being willing to be a sounding board, not a scrutinizing agent for your kid.
Great, thank you. Chris?
Well, again, I think that we need to understand that this is a long-term process. And so usually what I tell parents is, as your son or daughter starts talking about going to college, encourage that conversation. Do they know exactly what they want to do as they make that transition? No. And many of them will change their mind once they make the transition anyway. But have an ongoing conversation. The longer you talk about this, the longer you have the conversation, the longer you encourage your son or daughter to explore their options, the easier the transition will be, because the conversation has been happening and will continue to happen. Again, don't force your values and or your expectations of yourself on your son or daughter. Allow them to develop that for themselves. And as Brooke said, don't force them to do something that is not natural to them. Allow them to explore, allow them to have the conversation, not only with you, but with your colleagues, with their family members. The more people you can get involved in this planning process with the son or daughter, and the more people you get involved with the transitional process, the more resources they know that they'll have. Within the family, within the community that they have already established. And I think it helps them to develop new connections in the new community that they'll be joining, and makes it easier for that transition to happen.
Great, thank you. So with some of the things that I heard from our conversation today in terms of takeaways is the idea of really maintaining your relationship with your child. Don't expect to not have any contact with them. Be open, listen, be curious about what's happening in their lives, and really hear what it is that they're saying as they're talking to you about that, and to be that support for them. And also the opportunity to really help them navigate resources so that they know how to ask for help, when to ask for help, and where to go to ask for help, as some of the key tools in terms of supporting your child and a successful college experience. I'd like to thank each of the panelists for participating today. Dr. Sunda Friedman-Tabakhorst, Brooks Witter, and Chris Pacheco. Thank you each for being here today.
Hey, I'm making my own way, but I stumble and I falter every day. But I love my baby now. Well, I love my baby, I'm still learning how. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Stay with me. We'll beat this, can't you see? And wait a while, winter time.